Registration is officially open for FAMM, our Fertility Awareness Mastery Mentorship. Are you ready to specialize in fertility, advanced chart interpretation, and finally have the skills and confidence to support your clients resolve their most pressing menstrual cycle and hormone issues?
The chart speaks for itself. The chart does the talking. And it's been really, really cool to see that for myself. It really has transformed my practice and the structure of it. And logistically speaking, it's already doubled my income in the way that I've implemented it.
And now it's your turn. Join us in the last class of FAMM that we're offering this year in 2025. We're starting on July 8th. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/FAMMlive to apply now. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAMMLIVE. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 578. Today, I'm sharing my interview with Michelle Snyder. She is one of our FAMM practitioners currently in training. And in today's episode, we cover so many important topics, from her experience with hormonal contraceptives, suspected endometriosis that went undiagnosed for years, and how she came to cycle charting and how that has shifted her perspective. But I think that one of the most interesting parts of Michelle's experience is her educational background. She has a significant educational background in not only biology, but nutrition as well. And so she was truly astounded by how much she didn't know about her reproductive health. And this is a theme that we hear over and over again in our FAMM program when working with women's health professionals who've received training in many different areas. So before we jump in, let me tell you a little bit about Michelle. Michelle Snyder is a nutrition scientist and fertility educator with a background in human biology and a master in nutrition science. As the director of science for a personalized wellness biotech company, she focuses on proactive fertility care and helping women understand their cycles, protect their fertility, and make empowered health decisions. When she's not decoding hormone panels or challenging outdated nutrition advice, Michelle enjoys cooking, reading mystery novels, and spending time in Boston with her husband. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into today's episode. And I'm excited to be here today with Michelle. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Lisa. Thank you so much for having me. This is like a bucket list item for me.
Amazing. Sure. Well, thank you so much for coming on. As you know, and as the audience knows, of course, I love doing these episodes. And selfishly, it's a great opportunity for me to have a little extra time with you, although we've been seeing a lot of each other over the last several months. I always like starting with my most favorite question. And I feel like it'll be a great segue into everything we're going to talk about today. But let us know when you had your first period, how old were you? And take us through your journey with contraceptives, if you took them before, with menstrual health, and how you discovered charting and what has led you to do the work that you're doing now.
Absolutely. So my first period, 13 years old, quite standard. It really we're going through that whole phase of, okay, think I'm pretty regular, got more regular as time went on. And then things started going off the rails, probably like late middle school, and then the entirety of my high school journey, where I had really, really bad period pain. And of course, tale as old as time, when I got up the courage to tell my doctors, it was, take more Advil, you should really consider the pill. And I didn't. I kind of just struggled through it and never really got any answers. Around 20 years old, I really got to the point where I was like, okay, I should be taking this into my own hands. I was studying biology in college. So I was like, shouldn't I have some semblance of an idea of how the system works? I didn't. So I was like, I'm going to drive to Planned Parenthood and get birth control, because I read and heard that was the only thing that could really fix it. Plus I was on top of the pain, had hormonal acne, and was like, this will fix all my problems. So I was on the pill for 6 years, and honestly, it helped a bit with the symptoms. It didn't make them go away. It wasn't any magic pill. But then I actually, during that time, went to grad school for nutrition. So I was already on this path of like, I want to be in healthcare. I want to be in wellness. I want to know all these things about how the body works and how to treat it really well and how to get super healthy. So even in nutrition grad school, I had no clue about reproductive health, optimal fertility, none of that stuff. So I dove in on my own. And that's, of course, you were one of my early entries into the world of reproductive health. And I was like, I want to get off the pill in my own personal. That was what I had decided. So I switched actually to a hormonal IUD. Wasn't that much better, to be perfectly honest with you. I actually did not like that experience at all. So I had that for 2 years and then ultimately decided, okay, I'm done with all of it and came off contraceptives completely. And that's when I started really getting into the charting world at the same time. So in like trying to mirror what was happening in my life, I never stopped down that self-study of fertility and reproductive wellness. In addition to, I had graduated grad school and then I started working in personalized wellness biotechnology, actually at the same company I'm at now. And, I was probably like early to mid 20s, met my current husband, my boyfriend at the time, now my husband, and was like, I really should know this stuff. And so I just never stopped, got deeper and deeper, started telling all my friends about this. And the more I educated people, the more questions you get naturally. So it sort of accidentally turned into this business of fertility, health, and menstrual health. And that's, of course, why I'm in this program now. It's just because it's the best thing I've found when you really want to help someone out with this world and give them the really good information. So that's me cycling, birth control free, charting my little butt off and enjoying the ride. So I hope that
amazing. I love it. I love just the snapshot into your journey. And I mean, it's a common theme after interviewing so many of our practitioners that regardless of what your background was, it's not necessarily giving you a deep dive into, I mean, you might, obviously there's things that you are learning that are important, but in terms of the world of charting and the true deep dive into reproductive health and hormones and all those kinds of things, it's just not currently a standard thing.
Absolutely. That's what shocked me the most. I was like, someone deep in the sciences can come out with no knowledge about this. Like, how can I expect any of my friends or loved ones to have this either?
Mm-hmm. Well, and I wanted to ask you a clarifying question because you mentioned that you were using the pill for several years and you said that it helped a little, but obviously like it's still, it didn't fully fix everything, but you had some relief. And then you decided to switch to the IUD. Was it hormonal or non-hormonal?
It was hormonal.
Okay,
it was Kyleena, I believe.
Okay. And then you mentioned it wasn't a great experience. Do you want to share a little bit more?
Sure. So actually, I would love to clarify. The insertion that everyone has a horror story for was actually totally fine for me. So I'll be that. Hopefully, maybe if no one's heard a positive insertion story, it actually wasn't. It wasn't that bad. I mean,
well, and can I
say no pain?
Do you remember if you had it inserted at a certain time? Was it on your period like they recommend, or just a random day? Or it might be hard to remember. I'm just curious.
Such a good question. I don't think it wasn't during my period because actually no one recommended that to me. I truly have no clue because I think at that point I really wasn't in tune at all with what was happening. And actually, no, you'll enjoy this. I went in knowing what I knew at the time. So this is maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and said, I want the Cooper IUD because I would like non-hormonal. And she told me no mid-procedure, essentially. She was like, all right, well, if that's what you want, it's bigger. You haven't had kids, you're small, literally. And then mid-procedure was like, oh, and at that point, it wasn't excruciatingly painful, but it was uncomfortable. And at that point, I was like, okay, you convinced me. Yeah, put the smaller one in.
Okay, interesting.
And I'm like still a little salty about that whole experience, but I did go into that office wanting the copper IUD. And then got to the point where I was like, whatever, put in what you think and let me get out of here.
That is very interesting. And I mean, for a very practical reason of if you had chosen to go through with it, you might have had a different insertion story for us.
Very true.
Because I'm not inserting IUDs into women. I have never held one in my hand. So that's a useful piece of information, even from a practical standpoint, that the copper, at least in this case, obviously there could be different kinds. But in your case, the copper IUD was physically larger. And so even in that respect, I feel like that's the first time I've heard somebody say that was the reason why they were recommended the hormonal over. the size. Yeah.
And I looked it up later. I said, how much bigger is it really? I think it's maybe 1 or 2 millimeters wider, maybe a little longer. But yeah, I said, my critical thinking brain wasn't very on at the time.
Well, I mean, to me, like, it's not the same when you're like literally like you're not wearing any underwear and your like legs are like, and someone's like actively inside of your vagina. Like, it's not, this is not
right.
the time when you're going to be like, hold on, let me think for like, you know what I mean? I feel like that's not a fair. Yeah, that's just, she had the upper hand at that point. And then when you decided to remove the IUD and transition to fertility awareness, maybe share a little bit about your journey there. Like, what was that like for you? Were you avoiding pregnancy at that time? And if so, how did you mitigate any fears of potentially conceiving? Obviously, very common concerns for anyone who's thinking about making the switch.
Yes. I was faced with all of the objections that I think most people are. I associated it with very religious contexts. I was raised Catholic, and that's like, I don't think they know what they're talking about. So, no, and that's not to say that they don't, but that was my association. I didn't see it as a very scientifically precise tool that I do now. So yeah, I was worried about the inaccuracies of things. Even using tools like natural cycles, I was a bit skeptical of. I said, I don't know if I really trust that. So luckily I have a partner who's very willing to like respect our decision and use protection during at that time it was the whole cycle, because couldn't have really told you that we're infertile most of the time. So we're just like have sex, get pregnant, and die. That's what's in my generation's head. So that luckily wasn't a super big concern, because it was like, okay, we'll use protection, no big deal. But then the more I got into charting my cycle, and I was like, oh, it's only 6 days I have to target or not target, I guess, because I've never actually been in the trying to conceive scenario. We're still pre-kids. That may change in a few years, but that was always my goal, was to avoid pregnancy. Coming off of the IUD was actually a great experience, because I also bought into the whole, it's so localized, it's a very small dose, it's not really affecting you hormonally. I was told I would still be able to ovulate, which I guess was kind of true. But having the full cycle back with all of its color and all of its personality was such a great experience for me. And then learning the method, and which really, I would say, me charting before your program, like as a aspiring practitioner and charting now, the confidence boost was also extremely significant, just to have someone work through it with you and not just read it in a book. So, I mean, it just became more and more obvious when that window was for me to confidently, oh, this is fertile time, this is not. And I really think it's given me so much. It feels very micromanagey and like very obsessive when you haven't done it. But then when you do it, I'm like, wow, this is very freeing. I don't feel that there's a cost much at all when it comes to the charting process.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting to say that, because I resonate with that. I mean, that's been my experience where, yeah, you're tracking, you're noting things down, you're being very precise, especially depending on the method that you're using. So the method that we use is very precise in terms of how we track the various different signs. But interestingly, that structure, it allows you to be a lot more confident and to not just be riddled with fear, and
yes.
Everyone's different. But my experience I was so maybe I'm just weirdo, because I was so uncomfortable with the pill that in my personal experience, when I actually needed birth control, I was not comfortable with it, because I knew that I didn't always take it at the same time. And I'm very type A. So every time I would have taken it 3 hours too late or 5 hours, I would have been stressed about this. And so that was one of the reasons why I decided, okay, condoms it is. And then I promptly discovered fertility awareness, and that helped to give even more confidence. So I think it's interesting to hear that perspective, because obviously it's very opposite to what people would think.
Right. It's opposite to what I thought too. I was like, I don't want to be so obsessive. And even my friends who I do talk to about it, they're like, you have to take your temperature every morning and you can't get up. I'm like, well, yeah, first. And it was so valuable. And I know we didn't really plan to talk about it, but even the technology has gotten so good today that now that I know, I've done the baseline oral temperature for quite some time, and I've compared it to, I have an Oura ring. So it's like sometimes, I get a little lazy, but I've learned so much and I have this strong biological basis of what my body's doing that it's not taking over my life in my morning the way I think many people assume it does.
Yeah. I mean, we talk obviously extensively in the program about how to use and counsel clients on these various tools. Certainly, I'm sure I come across as like being super anti-tech, but maybe you could share a little bit about your experience with it, because we certainly do talk about it in the program as having a place. And it really depends on your client's goals. So for some clients, they may want to take a certain period of time to track like the manual
Yes.
way with the temperature if they have certain concerns about hormones or if they have certain concerns about their metabolism. That makes a lot of sense to do that because that's the most accurate way to gather that type of information. But I mean, I'm the worst to ask, but it's like, oh, it's just so much trouble taking your temperature. But it's like, but you brush your teeth though. And it takes about the
Mhm.
same duration of time. And no one's like, oh, I have to brush my teeth every day. Like, it's just, you know what I
Maybe
mean?
they are. No, I'm kidding. I fully agree. And I'd be happy to talk about it. So the oral, that's the method, is the oral temperature taking. I'll never say we should not do that. Though I did oral temperature and I compared it to my Oura ring because I'm a scientist and I love data and I wanted to see how they compared. But nothing could have ever replaced those like 3 or 4 months of like really targeted, I'm taking my temperature, I'm following the rules, I'm making sure there's no things that could manipulate it, or I'm noting it if there are. So I was really impressed that they correlated quite well, the temperature changes, but because the Oura ring is not the core body temperature, it's always a few degrees lower, which if you don't have the basal body temperature, I would have maybe assumed it was a thyroid or a metabolism issue because they're all under that 97.4 threshold for me. But because I did both, I said, oh, okay, I understand what's going on here. The thing about the Oura ring, which I love that it exists and it's an option, but the only way to get your temperature is through that natural cycles subscription connection. So that's the only way it transforms my temperature using an algorithm. And I have to say it, I have compared, and this is just me out of one, but I did compare all my chart fertile windows that I identified using cervical mucus and the things that we know how to look for with the fertile window that the natural cycles app gave me. And it does pretty well. But there was one cycle where it gave me green days on 2 of my fertile days. So it's just, and that's just me. I don't know any, and I have a pretty regular cycle. To see that in my own data was very jarring. I said, wow, like as good as these technologies are, nothing is ever going to replace or be better than your own body signs. So I throw that out there as, it's a good tool, but I would never fully rely on it.
Well, I mean, I appreciate you sharing that. And I feel like it's in the spirit of what we try to do in FAMM, which is truthfully, like the first step is to actually understand what's going on in your body, that you can track it in the pre-tech way, because the understanding is the most important part. And I have no issues with anyone everyone do whatever you want. I'm not in your house. Like I'm not, you know what I mean? Like I'm not involved. But my message typically is that we want to really understand how the tech works. And tech is kind of a mystery. There's so many interesting things that that are happening and all these different devices that are being created. And neither of us, or none of any, unless you're literally on, like you created the tech yourself, we don't actually know all of the different steps that they took to create it. We don't know even the rules they used to create the algorithms. There was a really interesting study, and Dr. Marguerite Duane, I think, was a part of this study, where they actually took a lot of these devices and apps that purport to tell you when your fertile window is, and they measured it based on actual guidelines. And very few of them actually met those guidelines. So similar to your experience of having a cup, like those days that it identified as safe that were actually fertile days, we're not throwing them under the bus because, of course, we use tech. All of us use tech. Plenty of our clients use tech. But I feel like the way that you're doing it is what makes sense to my brain, because we understand what is happening in our body. We understand how to track it. And then we can do those tests. We can do those science experiments. I've been privy to many because we have a lot of our FAMM practitioners who will test whether it's the temperature devices, or the temp drop, or they test their different apps that predict the fertile window and that kind of thing. And inevitably, if you track long enough, you will see at least one discrepancy, and even some of the temperature devices, like you said. So yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. And I think it's just useful information, right? It's like someone who's listening to that just learned something.
When I shared that, it was very surprising to a lot of people because I love the empowerment behind the idea of these apps. And I think they do a good job getting that message across. But when you're relying on archaic rhythm method thinking, like you always say, or the predictive style, like you cannot trust that fully over what your own body's telling you. Yeah.
Have you noticed the incredible amount of attention that menstrual cycle charting has been getting in the last few years? If you, as a women's health practitioner, have not yet specialized in fertility awareness cycle charting, you're missing out on a huge opportunity to support your clients. Year after year, the more clients and practitioners that I work with, it's clear that regardless of how much attention cycle charting is getting, the average woman still does not know how her cycle works, and her healthcare practitioners don't know either. It's time for us to be part of the solution instead of the problem. Join us in our next class of FAMM, our Fertility Awareness Mastery Mentorship. This is your opportunity to specialize in fertility awareness cycle charting and advanced chart interpretation.
If, like me, you've been thinking, this is the area I want to move into, and I just want more information so that I can support clients better, then this is what the course does. It gives you the structure. It's given me the confidence to feel like I can really support women in this field. And that's sort of worth every penny, because I think as a practitioner, you always want to feel like you're doing the best you can for them. So yeah, I'd just say if that's how you're feeling and this is the area you want to be working in, then it's a bit of a no-brainer, really.
Join us in the last class of FAMM that we're offering this year. We start in July, and you can head over to fertilityfriday.com/FAMMlive to apply now. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAMMlive. Well, I will, stand on this hill as well. I always say, like, the app doesn't know what's in your panties today.
Exactly.
It just doesn't.
It doesn't.
And you're not a robot. So
Yeah.
I've just been in this field too long. And one of the things we talk about a lot is the rhythm method thinking. And we're not intentionally trying to do it, but we have been programmed for years. The birth control pill is 28 days because that was the time they to mimic. That's what we're told is what the cycle is. It's not. I was looking at some data today, and I'm not going to go through the rabbit hole, but basically the author was saying that ovulation only occurs on day 14, at least in the study that he was citing, 34% of the time.
Wow.
So even for women who have, like you said, I have relatively regular cycles. A lot of us have relatively regular cycles, but if you actually track your specific data, for 6 cycles in a row, you're not going to ovulate on the same day 6 times. If you do, please send me the charts. But I'm just saying that's highly unlikely that you're going to ovulate on the exact same day 6 times in a row. I'm just saying, buy a lottery ticket, please.
Yes.
And then wire us some of the money.
Wire us, please do. It's never happened to me.
But jokes aside, this
so
is
funny.
Yeah. So it's one thing, we can think whatever we want. And when you start tracking, and you probably have this experience as well, because when you start tracking, you actually start to see oh, wait, I thought this was zipped up. I thought it was right. But then you see oh, wait, that 1 month that I had that stressful thing happen. Wow, my cycle shifted. I didn't expect that it would actually shift that way. So we learn a lot by just getting out of our heads and getting out of the rhythm method thinking. And this is one of the areas where the apps are, I think it's a bit challenging, because when a person is using the apps and taking it for face value without having the actual knowledge of how to chart, then when they have that, it's another dig in the camp of fertility awareness doesn't work, it's not effective. And there's plenty of that. I would like to be part of the solution. I would like to be part of the group that is trying to legitimize fertility awareness and be critical of some of those practices so we can really set our clients up for success.
I love what you said, even on the thought of how it's nonlinear. Even through charting, and I've made these very targeted protocol changes based on what I see, which is amazing. And no one really tells you that you're still a human being. So I had to kind of find it out the hard way. Like I, switched to decaf, getting my morning sunlight, have my nutrition dialed, like did all the foundational factors, saw improvements in my cycle. And then I think I just assumed I was locked in.
Yeah.
Like, cool. I have a 13-day luteal phase now for the rest of my life. And then, you have a tough month or something and it goes right back to 11 or 12 days. I said, oh, I didn't even think about that. You assume. We totally are creatures of the assumption and the patterns. And it is hard to take yourself out of it, but it's the best thing you could do because then you're not victim to those rhythm method style thinkings or assumptions.
I love that you said that because that's the reason why FAMM isn't just like a online video course that you can just passively consume. It's a mentorship for a reason. And because there's just certain things, if you're going to be that kind of mentor for your clients, there's certain things you actually have to experience. And I feel like and you've seen it in our classes, but I feel like every practitioner who goes through the program, they discover whatever they need to discover. But I've heard so many similar stories. And it could even be the opposite where you never had a luteal phase that was longer than 11 days. And you actually believe that I'm Michelle and I have 11-day luteal phases. That's just how it works here, at Michelle headquarters. Right? And I've seen that too, where all of a sudden, and it was I think I even spoke about this in a previous episode, but all of a sudden you have the 14-day luteal because you've been working on all your stuff and you're like taking pregnancy tests, all the things. You're just like, this has never happened before. What's going on? But really, you just didn't know that your body had that potential until you really started to pay attention to it. And it's one of the, this is when I say the menstrual cycle is a vital sign. Obviously, my first book had the name. It's not just a bunch of hot air. It's legit. And when you actually get in there and start charting and start to really figure this stuff out, you see that it does guide you. And the goal is not perfection. So that cycle that you saw, that luteal phase went down a little bit, that's not a failure. We're not looking at that saying, what did you do wrong? It's an opportunity for you to learn more because now you actually know. One, oh, wait, what I was doing was actually working. Because sometimes we think it's a fluke, right? Sometimes you think,
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So it's working. Like, oh, wait, that stuff I was doing actually makes a difference. Wow. And then, but then now oh, wait, I'm also human. I thought I was something other than human.
Oh my gosh. And I'm cracking up. I think I was definitely one of the ones, I think we even talked about it, how I saw that extended luteal phase and was like, oh, pregnant. So even though there's no way on God's green earth, because I knew the fertile window, but it's so funny. The mental side of it is maybe more challenging than the tracking part.
Absolutely. Well, and then the third part of it is that you start to learn. I feel like the biggest lesson for me that I try to impart is you learn that you have limits and you learn to actually be part of the conversation. So before you started charting, you were just doing stuff and your body was trying to talk to you, but you weren't listening. But now that you're charting, you're actually you're playing like catch and throw, like you're both participating in this conversation. And then it helps you because again, the goal, in my opinion, I say it over and over again, it's not perfection because that's silly, but it allows you to negotiate. And I really feel like as I start to get into these premenopausal years at the tender age of 42, this is becoming more on my radar. I start to think about that for women who, and I recognize not everybody had this opportunity, but for women who did have the opportunity to discover charting, whether it was in their 20s or 30s, and they have a couple of years under their belt, they start to see these kinds of things. And you start to see oh, wait, when I don't eat enough and don't sleep enough and I'm totally stressed out, I have these wild PMS cycles where I want to kill everybody. But when I, right? You start to kind of get into that dance of what your body really needs. And you kind of get out of the delusion that I could just do whatever I want. You realize okay, life is better when I stick within these parameters. And if I choose to do something, whatever, I choose to go out all night or drink one night or whatever. Obviously, if you choose to do that, it's totally fine. But you also recognize, you're starting to recognize that balance of okay, well, when I do that, this happens. So maybe I shouldn't do that all the time. And I think that practice of engaging and just kind of being in that space of action, reaction, getting to know your body. And it's hard sometimes because you see that you can't do that thing without having this consequence, but your friend might be able to do that thing. But I mean, you're not in her cycle, so you never know. But but our perception is that like, she can do whatever she wants. She can eat whatever she wants. Why do I have to, right? But like, the more you get into that space, I'm of the firm belief that as we move into those later years, as we move into that stage before menopause, that when we start to have less leeway, because when we were in our 20s, we could do all the things. And then when we're in our 40s, hit our early 50s, you can't, right? But you're already kind of used to the fact that you have limitations. I feel like, so there's a lot more to say about that, but I just wanted to share that as well, because I think there's a lot of value in what you just said, your experience of it, and think of how much that's going to help you when things do start changing a little bit more.
Exactly. The dance metaphor is beautiful. Just like, what other body part or body anything gives you that kind of feedback? I mean, to the level of detail that we can get, you're absolutely right. And even working for a company that does like blood testing and things like this, I still find the value of that like monthly report card to be infinitely more useful. That was the other reason too. I said, I want to, well before we even have kids, have the opportunity to get to know my body so well, everything you were just saying. Because without that on-ramp, how could I ever know? How could I ever know like what was actually working or what I read on a blog and didn't actually do diddly squat for me? Like, and now I've really had the opportunity to figure those things out. So, I mean, telling someone to come off contraceptives 2 years before trying sounds crazy still today. But without that, I'm like, how do you know anything? It's, but I mean, and of course it's always a give and take. Like there's possibilities for any time you come off contraceptive. I'm not to say that that's the only option, but for me, that was a gift.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's not to say there's one way or the perfect way or whatever,
Right.
because obviously people are going to do this differently. But I do think I like to be the person who's giving a different alternative than what the mainstream is saying, because for women who want to know more about their bodies and for women for whom this is something they really value, or they have concerns about hormonal imbalance, or whatever the case is, right? They have a special interest. It's invaluable, right? So it does present that opportunity. So we should at least know about it, while we know everyone isn't going to choose that. So you did mention some of the work that you do and the blood work analysis. I know you wanted to talk a little bit about that. Why don't you share a little bit about that, give us some background, but also I want to kind of hear what you think about it now, given your experience. Like, has it shifted the way you look at some of these things? All the things.
Oh, love it. Yes. So my experience, and for those who may not know, I'm currently the director of science for a personalized wellness company. And what that entails is we are taking in a lot of data on someone. So primarily through a blood test, potentially genetics if they have it, wearable tracker devices. And of course, the things that someone inputs, like this is what I eat, this is how I exercise, this is how I live. And it's so fascinating to be in this space. I think it's really hot right now, this like biohacky, longevity, wellness kind of vibe we have going on. But I love your question, because looking at it from the lens of what I know about reproductive health, it's fascinating to see the things that we associate with health that kind of explain why people still have reproductive health problems. So for instance, I know I get to look at a lot of blood work. So, and I have the gift of looking at a data set of a primarily healthy population. So those who have the time and the money to invest in a service like this, and they're usually really health conscious. And it gives me an idea beyond data sets like NHANES or UK Biobank of this sort of more healthy persona. And I still see trends that I don't think will surprise you at all, and probably most people listening, where vitamin D levels are consistently on that lower end. By lower end, I mean like 30 nanograms per milliliter or less. Whereas in our world, knowing what we know about the role of vitamin D in reproductive health and hormonal health and things like this, we want it more like 60 to 90. So a lot higher than even a lot of optimal zones recommend. So we have the clinical, yes, work is being done and it's really great on optimal zones. But for our purposes, that might be pushed even higher. And most people who we consider to be incredibly healthy simply aren't there yet. The other major one that we know is linked to a lot of fertility and reproductive health issues is the blood sugar. So fasted glucose, even for the healthiest people who look, feel, act super metabolically healthy, I see their blood dancing at around this lower 90, mid 90 milligram per deciliter level. Sorry, I'm American, so talking to you in the non-SI units. But really, we would want to see those like 70 to 90s, which is way lower than anyone's recommending. So to even see that in incredibly healthy populations gives me a lot of context, knowing that it's that avatar of someone who's doing everything right, who's like very health conscious, eating all the right foods, exercising, but we're still not quite there yet. There's still grounds to cover when it comes to if you wanted to really optimize for hormonal health and reproductive health and fertility.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate you sharing that. I feel the same way with the cycle because I'm on the other end of these conversations where someone will be following someone on social media and assuming, never assume, like assuming that because they look so great, their skin is glowing and they're so fit or whatever, that their cycles are great. Just the other day in one of our classes, one of our practitioners was sharing, she said, I was following this woman and she had an amazing exercise routine. Of course, her body looks perfect, only to discover that she doesn't have a period. And she only discovered it because she was working with a coach that she also followed, like a period recovery coach. And you know what I mean? So it's like, we can all look great. But I always say, well, in Lily and I in Real Food for Fertility, if there was a tagline, the menstrual cycle doesn't lie. And it's true. And similar to how doing the blood analysis gives you that like one step deeper level of like, you look great, you're doing everything great, like you're super healthy. Let's see what's happening with the blood work and seeing that there's a little bit of room for opportunity, room for improvement. I feel like it's often the same way with the cycle where it's like, overall, you're doing great. Like you've got a lot of these things in check, but there's often a little bit of room for a bit of refinement. And regardless of how, quote, healthy anybody is, a lot of us still have a few niggling things where like we're pretty good, but like I still have this like, and for women, it's often not little, but it's like, oh, everything's great except for this like ridiculously horrendous period pain that I have once a month. Or this like raging PMS that occurs for 5 days, right? When you're working with clients, it's like everything's great except for this giant, massive thing that's not working, right? That we minimize. But tracking our cycle helps us to get clarity.
Exactly. And then again, tale as old as time, I have a perfectly normal, healthy, regular period because it comes when I expect it to. And like that being the end of the definition. I see that a lot. And then that's, of course, what we're told as well. If it comes when around you expect it and the bleed doesn't deviate from your normal, then that's considered healthy. So that actually was something that I found to be like an additional step of, because people I think assume they're very regular and healthy, even if they have, that crazy thing. But because their period's always 29 days, or their cycle's always 29 days, and their period's always 3 days, it's healthy, it's perfect. So it's like, oh my
goodness. Yes. Well, it's just so, there's always more to dig into, I guess. That's kind of when you're interested in this topic. And when at the end of the day, what I find is that sometimes clients will come for a specific reason. And the things that we're talking about, maybe the PMS or the period pain, because that's not the main thing, they're not even thinking about that. And because we've been so programmed to think that it's normal, it's Shark Week, right? It's like that time of the month, at flow, whatever euphemism. And I had a conversation with one of my past clients. I shared this in my email newsletter last week. And she shared her story with me. She was like, Lisa, you were the first person who ever told me that my periods didn't have to be painful. And that I didn't have to like work out like a maniac while I was bleeding.
Oh no.
And I was like, well, yeah, that's like the whole point.
I know.
But it's those little things that after you hear them and after you kind of sit with it, right? Like, so everyone who's been listening to the podcast for so long is like, well, obviously. But for newer listeners remember when you yourself didn't know this information when you first discovered it was revolutionary for someone to tell you that, because we just live in this really interesting world where we just normalize all the things that are not normal, especially
so normalized. Yes. And the period pain one, because of my personal experience, which was having essentially undiagnosed endometriosis, because no one would ever to really take the time to diagnose me, because first of all, it was, the surgery, it's a surgery, just go on the pill, it's just take Advil, super normal, again, normalizing it. But yeah, to the point where if losing sight, I remember it would be literally losing sight temporarily because of how painful it was. I remember in high school, I was popping like, oh my gosh, 10 to 12 ibuprofen a day just to like stay on top of and curb that's not normal. No one told me that wasn't normal. And I had friends, I thought it was because I had friends who would like throw up during lunch every single day on their period. I'm like, oh, cool. I have it easy because I'm not puking in school. Can you believe? It's so infuriating. But yeah, the more people we can tell that that's not normal, that's common, yes, normal, no. And it's a red flag. It's worthy of investigation. Find somebody who will listen to you. I think that's what's frustrating too, is because I tried asking not one, not two, maybe three different doctors over the course of my life and not really getting an answer from any of them. It's very frustrating. Mm-hmm. Even to the point where, I was a nutrition student, and by my mid-20s, I was doing everything right. I eat really well. I exercise. I know this about health. I know I have to sleep. I know I need to like have a stress management practice. Why is it not going away? So just getting more and more information and going things like your book, incredibly well researched, go into studies. We have these evidence-based protocols, and just saying, oh, there's no cure is incredibly dismissive of all the things you can do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I appreciate you sharing that. It is unreal how common that story is. I've shared many times on the podcast and a variety of different episodes, the research that we have on endometriosis and how difficult it is to get a diagnosis. So one of the studies that's commonly quoted shows that it takes anywhere from 8 to 12 years on average for women to get a diagnosis. There was an episode that I recorded, I'll have to link it, and I titled it That One Doctor, I think, there was a paper called That One Doctor, and it was a qualitative analysis of women's experiences. And I always love when I can read qualitative studies. They don't have as much data in terms of, usually there's fewer participants, obviously. They titled the paper that because that was what they kept hearing, because they were interviewing all these women who ended up having an endometriosis diagnosis. And they kept saying that after going to doctor after doctor after doctor, like in your case, it was that one doctor who even used the word endometriosis. It was like a huge number of these women who ended up getting the diagnosis, who had never even heard it before that one doctor told them after they'd been to multiple. So it's just really unfortunate and unconscionable that women have to suffer so much. And like you said, and you're not alone. How many, I wish I could see, like, I wish there was an audience in front of me. I could see all the listeners and raise your hand if you fully thought that your painful periods weren't that bad because either you had a girlfriend who was also throwing up in the bathroom, or she was doubled over when you were only like half doubled over or whatever. I mean, it's unreal what we put up with. But maybe we can end on a note of hope. And you could share a little bit about what you did, because you did share that you've experienced a bit of a shift here. So share a little bit more about your story. And when did you figure out that it wasn't normal? And when did you put that potential endometriosis name to what you were experiencing?
Absolutely. The time I figured out it wasn't normal, let me see. At that point, I had already been on the IUD. So it was like quite a few years after the worst of my experience. So I had that's why I'll never really crap on hormonal birth controls, because it did give me the space and the symptom-free time to like really do digging for things like this. Can I say
something? Sorry,
yes.
Now that I think about it, because we had that whole conversation about the copper IUD with potential endometriosis level pain. I feel like that would have been a bad idea, because the copper IUD notoriously makes the pain worse and the bleeding more heavy. But anyways, that was just a thought that came to mind.
Well, maybe that was such a blessing in disguise.
Maybe.
And I know I think I mentioned it.
Because it's like, you were like, I wanted the other one, but I don't know. As soon as I hear pain, I'm like, oh no, not the copper one. No.
That's so true. Though I would have appreciated if she knew that, it wasn't like a...
Okay, you're asking too much now.
I know. I guess she did me a favor. We'll roll with that.
Thank you.
It's so true. Yes. So I would say it was around that time. I wasn't completely off, like free and clear of contraceptives yet. And I was in nutrition school. So I was like, yeah, I know this stuff. Like, I know I eat really well. I know this anti-inflammatory, but learning that endometriosis is not a period problem, nor is it really hormonal. It's inflammatory. That just like simply learning more made me feel in control. So beyond just like doing all the quote unquote basic things right, learning more. So Katie Edmonds' Heal Endo book. Oh my gosh. I loved that book. And then seeing everything I would read online, like, oh, research is limited, eat some colorful veggies, there's no cure. That's pretty much what I would find on the internet. But hearing her say there are like tens of thousands of studies on endometriosis, and there's a lot that we know, I was like, wow, just that made me, I think the control being back in my hands made a shift. So, and this is why I was mentioning you, yes, the practical stuff absolutely mattered. It was such a solid foundation, but I really needed to buy in to the fact that when I was running these solutions, I felt really confident in my life and in my mind, like, okay, I have some semblance of like say of how this whole thing goes for me. That's when I really started to see results. So I'm so obsessed with this connection between like, and I won't get into like all my quantum biology stuff, but just this idea that we can give language to something that a lot of us innately know, which is like our environment and our lifestyle and our emotions and the way we feel about things and our intention influence our biology. So it's like, yes, eating correctly, sleeping well, foundational factors matter. They never won't, but you need to feel at home in your body as well. And I think once I did that, it was like the final, I don't want to say nail in the coffin, but that's like that's like the opposite of what I want to say. It's the only stinking saying that comes to my mind. It was like the final step. It was like what I needed to like actually get to the lasting results where I haven't had any flare-ups or like painful periods. I mean, I can get away with no Advil these days, which to me is revolutionary. I'll take a hot water bottle because I like to cuddle up on the couch with it, but I don't need any of the things that I used to rely on to get through a period anymore. It's fascinating.
Well, and I mean, the mindset piece is huge. And I think, I'm not sure if this made a difference for you, but having a name to know what's going on,
Yep.
It changes things as well, because it also, when you have that information, it also opens the door to additional steps that you wouldn't have taken if you didn't know that that's what it was, right? Like additional resources that's specifically targeted. Like obviously a huge fan of Katie Edmonds. We had her on the podcast. We also had her do an incredible 2-part training for our FAMM practitioners last year and this year. I think it spilled over. And I feel like I was going to say something else. That's right. I was going to ask you, in your situation, because of course someone's listening thinking, well, that's nice for her.
Right.
I've had this pain for insert how many years. I could not, like, I just don't even believe it's possible for me not to have pain. And it's different for everybody, because certainly not everybody is able to get rid of their pain 100%, but certainly most women are able to see some sort of improvement. So what would you say were a few things that you feel made the biggest difference for you?
I would say dialing in the foundational factors, which takes time.
Yeah.
I think that's what we think, that once we know it, for me, and I have the luxury, like the massive privilege of going to literal school for honestly foundational factors, just like diet and lifestyle. And the like lag time it took for that information to be in my brain and then to actually make its way into my daily habits was years. So it's like knowing it, absolutely, like that, yes, that makes you feel better. But then there is like a delay in the time where you really like implement all of it. So I would say the first is like, if you don't see results in like 6 months, like it's okay, like keep doing it like this. I'm talking about this entire thing over the span of 6 to 7 years worth of practice and trial and error and experimentation. So it wasn't instant. I mean, I didn't do it in even a year or two. The other thing was, once you get the basics down, you can start ratcheting up and leveling up. So that was cleaning up my environment. So, reducing as much as I could exposure to the endocrine disrupting chemicals and making an environment be more suitable. So like fertility supportive things, anti-inflammatory things, I could really maybe invest in, like, I don't know, the gadgetry and the supplements and the things that really were that next level. And then the stress on the system, not just feeling stressed, because I was never a person that felt very stressed, but just knowing that I was living in this chronically inflamed state, there is stress on my system. So I love how Katie calls it the salugens. So really taking stock of what could be stress on my system, even if it doesn't feel like stress, and then reducing those things where I can. So I found like rest, joy, creativity, like what's the opposite of an activated nervous system? Probably those things. So that was like maybe the final tier of the protocol. And it took years. I mean, this doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't even happen over a couple of years. So yeah, it probably won't even be done, right? I mean, it's like a lifelong thing, healing. So maybe that would be my best advice to someone who's frustrated.
I appreciate that because it's how it really looks. And anyone who works in this field, kind of in that coaching kind of realm, or more of like the natural health field and those types of things, there's a difference between knowing and doing. And I think a lot of times people are frustrated because they all say, I know all of this stuff, but it's like, but what are you? And that's why I always say, that's why I love the cycle, because the cycle gives us the information. And if you're not doing the things, the cycle isn't going to respond because you're not doing the things. And it's not easy to do the things. That's the hardest part. And it does take time in order to, like you said you learn the information, but in terms of buying in and actually doing it, that's what takes the time. And then you also have to learn your body, because when you learn information, you learn it kind of template style, and you have to figure out then how is this specifically going to affect me? So I really appreciate you going through that and painting a more realistic picture. It doesn't mean it has to take years. I would imagine that if you knew then what you know now, you probably could have truncated that a little bit, but it's still, for the average person, it does take some time. So, I mean, obviously, this has been such a fun conversation. I could keep talking to you for the rest of the day, but at some point we have to call it. And so as we start wrapping up, I always love asking a few questions. I would love to ask you about your experience in FAMM. You came in highly educated, obviously. You had a wealth of personal experience and professional experience. So for somebody who is on the fence, thinking about jumping into the program, I know that I have a lot of longtime fans that have this on their bucket list. So jumping into the program. So maybe share what prompted you to jump in when you did, and what your experience has been in the program.
I'm trying to think of how I can elongate. Please do it. Please join it. But yes, you're absolutely right. I think because I never actually doubted how incredibly informative and enriching, empowering, like I know that word's kind of overused, but the confidence I have now versus the confidence I had 6-7 months ago in this particular field, it's a dramatic increase. And so for anyone who knows a lot of this, there's still so much more to learn. And it's not even like a egotistical, like I already know this, because if you're in your orbit for a while, you do, like the podcast, your books, it's all incredibly informative, but not only for the things that you can do to help other people, which I know is something that is probably our biggest goal, but for for yourself. So for me, this is like the oxygen mask before everyone else, but like you're saying, to actually be in the trenches and charting every month and going through the motions, like as a client, I learned so much about my own personal health and things that I really might not have picked up on had I just been charting the way I was previously. And then the confidence to really take on clients. So like I was saying, I started very education based, just like, getting the stuff out to the world. And naturally, when people start to ask you questions, there was always this fear of like, am I really giving them the best thing for them? Because in my head, it's like, 40 different papers swimming and all these things. I'm like, what's the best? And this really helped me. Like, there are these beautiful protocols. Here's how you can adapt it to where your person's at based on all the different criteria that they fit in across the things we know about them. It gets hyper specific. So, I mean, my confidence in working with people has just absolutely hit a new level. And I think, yes, it's an investment, but it's you. If you work with clients, you get the return on investment, and then you feel really, really good about your work with them. So I don't know. It just, to me, it's, if you are on the fence, please do it. Lisa, this is a wonderful program. And like seeing you every week, it's a delight. I love your metaphors. I love your jokes. I love your isms because they help me help other people. Really, do it.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle. It is just, it's obviously, I thoroughly enjoy the program, and it's really interesting for me to just kind of see how my dream to bring FAMM into the world, like fertility awareness method, there's a double entendre happening here. But my dream of bringing it into the world, it's really fun to see how that has shifted. And it's truly just a joy to share this with practitioners. I love to see, and the interesting part about the mentorship part is that, yeah, we give you a ton of information in the first part of this program, but a lot of your own experience and learning just kind of happens as you chart. I'm going to stop, but thank you so much. That was just the most wonderful testimonial to share. And so really thankful for that. And let us know where you are, where the listeners can learn more about you and what you do. If you're on the socials, if you have anything exciting happening, let us know all the things and all the places.
Amazing. I'm like the weirdest 30-year-old. I've never had an Instagram, but you can find me on LinkedIn. That's where I talk to most of my clients and I post there quite regularly. I also have a website at wttnutrition.com. And I have a blog there where I like to put some more long form stuff, educational, some YouTube videos from some free events I've done. So I really love the ability to learn in one space. I try to create that. So yes, we know there are research gaps. We'll advocate all day long for more women's health research, but let's acknowledge the gap where the research isn't getting to us. So I think you do that wonderfully. It's a big mission of mine as well. So yeah, people are welcome to reach out whenever.
Amazing. Well, I will make sure to link all of those places. Michelle, thank you so much for being here. This conversation was so fun and informative, and I'm really excited to share it.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Loved it.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode and you're wanting to share it with a friend or you're wanting to grab any of the links that we talked about, head over to fertilityfriday.com/578. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode with Michelle. Such an important theme came up in today's episode. And this has been a recurrent theme in all of my client work over the past 2 decades, which is that even when you're searching for support from the most qualified health professionals, there is very little training in any standard programming around the menstrual cycle, specifically menstrual cycle health, menstrual cycle charting, tracking, using the menstrual cycle as a vital sign, even understanding the connection between the menstrual cycle and health. It is just such a huge opportunity, a missed opportunity for most women's health professionals. And I feel like that theme really came out in today's episode. This is one of the areas in women's health that I really feel is going to become more and more prominent in the coming years. Because as more women discover cycle charting and as more women become familiar with this concept that your menstrual cycle is a reflection of health, they are going to want to work with practitioners who embody this and who understand this and who can support them to achieve optimal health, especially when the medical interventions that they're being offered aren't necessarily resolving their issues. So I do hope that you enjoyed today's episode. Like I said, it was such a treat to have Michelle on the show, and we really could have talked all afternoon. We had so much to talk about, but I'm thrilled at the variety of different topics that we were able to squeeze into today's episode. So with that said, I hope you have a wonderful weekend, whenever you're tuning into the show. And of course, as always, until next time, be well and happy charting. If you've been loving the podcast, then I know you'll love our Fertility Awareness Mastery Mentorship. This is our certification program designed specifically for women's health professionals. Not only does FAMM certify you to teach fertility awareness to your clients in practice, but we dive deep into the science, equipping you to use your menstrual cycle as a vital sign and diagnostic tool with your clients.
When I decided to sign up, it was super last minute. I might have been like your last person or something. I didn't know if I should do it, because I kind of had this weird imposter syndrome of like, is this for me? I remember I talked to a friend and she was just like, Grace, you care about this so much. Like, why would you not do it? It sounds like such an amazing opportunity. And it has been better than I anticipated. Every certification that I've done up until this point, and I've done many, and I just love how much in-person contact there is, how we like actually get to know each other. And that has been the most wonderful part about the program. Other things that I've done, it's very kind of screens off. If there is an in-person element, screens off, nobody talks. And I love that that's the case here. Like, you can ask as many questions as you want. It's been probably the best part about this year for me. And I definitely did not have time for it. So if you think that's you, you'll figure it out.
Head over to fertilityfriday.com/FAMMlive to apply now. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAMMLIVE.